you started. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Are you ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
Turn to 1 Thessalonians 4. Pardon me, 1 Thessalonians 4. As you turn there, does everybody realize that Bill and Teresa are new grandparents?
No.
They had a new granddaughter born yesterday afternoon. Allie, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And mother and daughter and dad, and they're all doing well.
Doing
Right?
right.
Good deal. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Are you at 1 Thessalonians 4?
Yes, sir.
Look in verse 13. But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that you sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Yahushua died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Yahushua will Yahweh bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of Yahweh, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of our Master shall not prevent them which are asleep. For our Master himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of Yahweh, and the dead in Messiah shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet our Master in the air, and so shall we ever be with our Master. Wherefore comfort one another with these words. This morning we're going to begin preparing ourselves for the observance of Yom Teruah. We're going to prepare ourselves to observe it by looking into the scriptures to find out what it is and to find out what we are to do. If we take the time this week and next week to do those two things, find out what it is, find out what we are to do, then when Yom Teruah arrives, we will be prepared to observe it instead of just being prepared to hear about it.
Right.
Sometimes, we've been trying to pull away from that for the last few observances of the moedim. When we first started, all the moedim, we spent studying them. We spent hearing about them. Well, we want to be prepared ahead of time so that we can observe instead of just hear about.
Yes, sir.
Okay? You agree to that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. When we gather together on the first day of the 7th month, which will be the 19th day of our Gregorian calendar of September at sunset, it is my desire that we not gather just to hear, but that we gather to observe. So let's begin this morning by reminding ourselves of what it is. And in order to understand what it is, we have to be willing to take a look at exactly what is said about it. Exactly. Everybody say exactly.
Exactly.
Which means that when we look at what we're going to look at today, what we're told about Yom Teruah, we cannot infer things into it that are not there.
Right.
And we cannot read it with any preconceived ideas of what we think should be there. And we cannot let the traditions of men shape our opinion of what it says when it doesn't actually say that. Everybody agree?
Yes, sir.
I say that because at first that is exactly the mistake that I made. I came to the study of Yom Teruah with preconceived ideas. I came to study this moedim assuming that it was a feast that foreshadowed the trumpet that would sound before the coming of the Messiah. Traditionally, that is the way it's viewed.
Right.
So I let those traditions and those preconceived ideas affect my understanding of what this moedim or what this feast is actually all about. It is called in the scripture Yom Teruah. It's most widely known by people as the Feast of what? Trumpets. The Feast of Trumpets. So I assumed that the word Teruah just meant trumpet. It's the day of the trumpet or the Feast of Trumpets. And since it's called the Feast of Trumpets, I assume that it must foreshadow, be a picture of the trumpet blast that we read about and just read about in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Those are safe assumptions to make.
Right.
I mean, you're not really getting way out on a limb.
Right.
If this is the Feast of Trumpets, you're not getting out on a limb to assume that it foreshadows the trumpet blast in 1 Thessalonians 4. And one day I was reading that passage in 1 Thessalonians 4, and I saw that phrase in verse 15 and got excited. Verse 15, for this we say unto you by the word of Yahweh. Well, in 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul describes the return of the Messiah. He describes the resurrection from the dead of those who died in faith. He describes those who are alive at the return of the Messiah. He described them being changed and caught up in the air to meet the Messiah there with those who had also been resurrected ahead of time. And he now says in verse 15 that he said all of that because he had received it by the word of Yahweh. Those words by the word of Yahweh excited me, and here's why. When I began to study Passover, I was astounded at how every minute detail that we read about in the Torah concerning Passover, how every minute detail of Passover was mirrored in the death of our Messiah.
Right.
Or that our Messiah mirrored the details that we saw in the book of Exodus. The details of bringing the lamb into the home on what day? The 10th day of the first month. The slaying of the lamb on the 14th day of the first month at what time? Betwixt the evenings. Very good. The details of how the blood was applied and the purpose of the blood. Every detail of that event foreshadowed everything we read about in the Gospels concerning the death of the Messiah and even in the epistles. He entered into Jerusalem on what day? How do we know? Because they make it clear. They make it plain that he came into Jerusalem on the 10th day. It was necessary that he arrive on the 10th day. He went into his father's house on the 10th day. Why? Because the lamb has to be brought into the house, the household. And so he went into his household, his father's house, because he was not going to be man's lamb. He was going to be the Lamb of Yahweh that takes away the sin of the world. So he went into his father's house on the 10th day of the first month. And he was arrested and slain betwixt the evenings of the 14th day. And his blood became a propitiation for our sins. So when I read in 1 Thessalonians 4, Paul describing the return of the Messiah and it being preceded by the sound of a trumpet, and I heard that Yom Teruah is the Feast of Trumpets, and I heard that the Feast of Trumpets foreshadows the event Paul described in 1 Thessalonians 4. I heard that. That's what's taught. That's what people say. And then when I read that phrase in verse 15, by the word of Yahweh, I got excited. I could not wait to go study Yom Teruah. I wanted to start digging into the details of this moedim because I thought that if I studied the details of it, I would certainly find everything that Paul found and described in 1 Thessalonians 4. That I would see that Yom Teruah in every detail foreshadowed the second return that would be preceded by a trumpet blast. That's the preconceived idea I had when I went to study Yom Teruah. Understand that?
Yes, sir.
I went to study it with that preconceived idea. But when I went to study it, that's not what I found. What Paul described in 1 Thessalonians 4, he did get it by the word of Yahweh. But he did not get it from what we're told about Yom Teruah. You have to take what Paul describes in 1 Thessalonians 4 and you have to force it into the moedim of Yom Teruah. It does not easily fit. Remember what we said about the reality and the shadow when we were studying Passover.
Right.
If the reality doesn't fit into the shadow, then what you're calling a reality isn't the reality.
Right.
The shadow will show you exactly what the reality ought to look like. And so what Paul described in 1 Thessalonians 4, for us to say Yom Teruah foreshadows that, we have to force it in. It does not naturally fit in there. There are two passages that tell us about Yom Teruah. So what we're going to do today is look at those two passages. We're going to let them say exactly what they say. And then we'll allow those passages to tell us what it is and to tell us what we're to do. Okay? So let's look at those. Go to Leviticus 23. That make sense? You understand? Okay.
Yes,
Thought it necessary to tell you, before we really look at it, how I approached it.
Right.
I approached it thinking that we could take and make it about 1 Thessalonians 4. But I no longer believe that we can. So we're at Leviticus 23. We pick up in verse 23. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, in the 1st day of the month, shall ye have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein, but you shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. That's all it says about Yom Teruah. That's very short, very concise. Don't you wish it said a lot more?
Yes, sir.
Don't you wish there was maybe 2 or 3 chapters written about it? Yeah, but that's all it says. And notice, just for our sake of pushing out tradition and preconceived ideas, notice there is nothing there that even hints of the Messiah's return. Nothing there that even hints of the resurrection of the dead. Nothing there that even hints of those who are alive at his return being changed and called up to meet them in the air. So maybe it's in the other passage it speaks about Yom Teruah. So let's go read it. Go to Numbers 29. You there?
Yes, sir.
Verse 1. And in the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, so we're talking about the exact same moedim, right? First day, 7th month. You shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work. It is a day of blowing the trumpets unto you. You shall offer a burnt offering for a sweet savor unto Yahweh, 1 young bullock, 1 ram, and 7 lambs of the first year without blemish. And their meat offering shall be of flour mingled with oil, 3/10 deal for a bullock, and 2/10 deals for a ram, and 1/10 deal for 1 lamb throughout the 7 lambs, and 1 kid of the goats for a sin offering to make an atonement for you. Beside the burnt offering of the month and his meat offering, and the daily burnt offering and his meat offering, and their drink offerings according unto their manner, for a sweet savor, a sacrifice made by fire unto Yahweh. Now, we have a lot more details here given to us. It seems there's more description, but there really isn't a lot more real details. There's no hint or shadow of the return of the Messiah in what we read, is there? No. If you see it and I don't, tell me. But I see no hint or shadow of the return of the Messiah. There's no mention of the resurrection of the dead or being caught up in the air and changed at the return of the Messiah. Nothing there that I see that could foreshadow any of that. So I thought that if I did a word study on every word in those 2 passages, perhaps that would reveal it to me. But I did, and it did not. When we break down Leviticus 23, and you can go back there if you would, the instruction there is simple. It says in verse 24, In the 7th month, in the 1st day of the month, shall ye have a Sabbath, a memorial, a blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. So the instruction there is very simple. We're to observe this moedim when? 1st day, 7th month. We are to do what? Have a what? Have a Sabbath. And that word translated Sabbath there isn't the normal word for Shabbat or Sabbath. It is Sabbatism. It means more than rest. It's actually explained in the latter part of the verse. I think I heard Rita say it, the Holy Convocation. It means to have a holy, sanctified, set-apart rest day with an assembly, a Sabbatism. In other words, you cannot observe this feast by simply resting by yourself at home.
Right.
There is a command here to assemble. We are to have a Sabbatism, a Sabbath where we gather together. And then it says, so seventh day, first month, have a Sabbatism, a memorial. A memorial means that by word or action or by some object, we are to bring something to mind. Memorial, remember. We're to think on something. We are to have a memorial. Well, what are we to memorialize? We're not told, are we? If we just let it say what it says, we're not told. There are no details there of what we're to memorialize. For instance, when we're told to make booths, sukkots for ourselves, later in that seventh month, when we're told to make booths, are we told why? We are told why. Why? We're to remember that Yahweh delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt, made them dwell in booths.
Right.
But here it says we're to have a memorial, but we're not told why. We are told that it is to be accompanied by the blowing of the trumpet. That's what it says in King James Version. Anybody else got a different version? Everybody's the blowing of trumpet, or blowing of the trumpet. Now here's where the word study gets very interesting. We would expect that if we see the phrase blowing of the trumpet in English, that we could go to the Hebrew from which it's translated and see two things. One, we would expect to see the Hebrew word for to blow, and that is the Hebrew word takah, T-A-Q-A. We would expect, okay, in the original manuscript there is takah. And we would expect to see the word for trumpet. What's the Hebrew word for trumpet? Shofar. So we would expect to see takah. We would expect to see shofar. There is another Hebrew word for a trumpet, and it refers to a silver trumpet. Tough one to say. I'm not even going to attempt it today. I can spell it for you. C-H-A-T-S-O-T-S-E-R-A-H. Put a lot of guttural sounds in there and sound it out yourself. Go ahead. Suzanne, you was talking about those guttural sounds this morning. But what I fully expected when I began to break down verse 24, here's what I expected to read. I expected to read, and the takah shofar. Wasn't even really excited about looking it up because I just expected takah shofar to be there. Blow the shofar. But that's not what I saw, and that's not what it says. So understand there is one Hebrew word here in this verse, and it's the word teruah. That whole phrase is translated from that one Hebrew word, teruah. No word for blow, no word for trumpet. And teruah does not mean trumpet. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But let's finish in verse 25. See what else we're told to do. You shall do no servile work therein, but you shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. So the Sabbatism is a call for us to gather together in a holy convocation, and then we're told to do no servile work and to bring an offering to Yahweh. That's exactly what it said. All of that is simple enough to understand except for the phrase, a memorial of teruah, and that's all it says. It shall be a memorial of teruah. Look that word teruah up, and here's what the Strong's Hebrew Dictionary definition is. The Hebrew word teruah comes from the root word ruah, R-U-A. Ruah is to split the ear with sound. Or we would say it this way, a ruah is an ear-splitting sound. Everybody say sound.
Sound.
That's what ruah is. Ruah is a reference to a sound. We might have words for sounds, right? Honk, toot. We got words for sound. Well, the Hebrew word for an ear-splitting sound is what? Ruah. Very good. Teruah, when you put that prefix on it, teruah means to shout loudly without ceasing that ear-splitting sound. It means, Strong says, it means to clamor. C-L-A-M-O-R, to clamor. Clamor means to have an uproar. It means to shout vehemently. It means to scream. Teruah is a reference to the roar of a crowd. Strong's goes on to say that it is the acclamation of joy or it is a battle cry. Acclamation of joy or a battle cry. We'll put that together and what do we have? We have this. Teruah is the ear-splitting shouts of people who have gathered together to express their uncontrollable joy, or they have gathered together to enter into battle. But for whatever reason, whichever one of those two reasons they have gathered together to either acclaim their joy or to go into battle, they gathered together and they put forth shouts of ear-splitting sounds. Break that down and you get the essence of teruah. Teruah is a sound made by people. It's a loud, ear-piercing sound. So we can look at the references, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but we can look at the references, we can look at the definition, and we can safely come to this fact, to this conclusion. Teruah is not a trumpet. A trumpet can make a loud, ear-piercing sound. A trumpet can teruah, right? But the teruah is not a trumpet. The ear-piercing sound it refers to is not made only by a trumpet. It can also, and most often is, made by people, especially large crowds of people. So to say that Leviticus 23:24 refers to a trumpet is to infer what is not said. It is not even implied. It's not implied, and to infer it is to be in error. It's not what it says. The verse actually says that there is to be a memorial of a loud, ear-piercing sound. There's no Hebrew word for blowing, and there is no Hebrew word for trumpet. So it makes it interesting that you would find the words in English, blow the trumpet, when neither one of those words are used in that passage. Let me read this verse to you. Leviticus 23:24. Let me read it to you out of the interlinear. I think you're pretty familiar with interlinear now. It just gives us the Hebrew words and their exact definition in the order that they are in the Hebrew, without trying to really bring across what the verse might mean. It just takes, this Hebrew word was first, this is what that means. This one's second, this is what that means. It just gives you word by word in the word order of the Hebrew word. So here's what it says in the Hebrew word order. And spake Yahweh to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, shall be a Sabbath, a reminder signaled, a gathering holy. Any work of service, no, you shall do. So that's the order that it comes in. Now notice in the English we have blowing of trumpets, but notice what the interlinear did with it. Because all the interlinear would do is give you the definition of those words. And the interlinear took that blowing of the trumpet, a memorial of blowing of the trumpet, and shortened it to what it actually says, which is a reminder signaled. Right? The interlinear will not and does not take the liberty to translate it to the blowing of a trumpet. Now the interlinear will also smooth the word order out to make it flow better in English. And so off to the side of that, you will read this in the interlinear. They smooth it out, put it in English word order, and here's what it says. Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, in the 7th month you shall have a Sabbath, a memorial acclamation, a holy gathering. Notice even there it doesn't take the liberty to say the blowing of a trumpet. Do you know why it doesn't take the liberty to say the blowing of the trumpets? Because the word for blow was not there and the word for trumpet's not there. And so they translate it exactly as it is, and that is a memorial teruah, a memorial acclamation. The word teruah is an acclamation. It is a signal. It is an ear-piercing sound that signals joy or signals battle. I will not take you through the passages where this word teruah is used. I would encourage you to do that later. Just look up the word teruah. And in order to do that, all you got to do is take your e-sword, go to Leviticus 23:24, right-click on that word trumpet. It'll show you the word teruah there. And when you right-click on it, it will say, quick search through Old Testament for that word. And you click on that, and it'll show you every place that word teruah is used. If you need help with that, get with me and I'll let you know. But it'll show you every place the word teruah is used. And when you do that, what you're going to find is the word teruah was used in Torah, in Tanakh, 36 times, a total of 36 times. In those 36 times it was used, only twice is it translated as the word trumpet. Only twice. And we just read those. In Leviticus 23 and in Numbers 29. So if it's never translated trumpet anywhere else, but only when it's referring to this moedim is it translated trumpet, does it not sound to you like somebody's trying to force 1 Thessalonians 4 to fit here? That if this is the first moedim of the 7th month, it's got to be a reference to the rapture. It's got to be a reference to the coming of the Messiah. It's got to be a reference to our being called up in the air. But in order to make it that, we have to force it to be that. Because nowhere else is this word translated as a trumpet. The word teruah is what? Help me before I go on. What's the word teruah mean? Just say an ear-piercing sound made by people. Ruah means ear-piercing sound. Teruah means an ear-piercing sound made by people. It can be made by a trumpet. I'm not saying it can't be made by a trumpet. But anytime it's made by a trumpet, if you'll go look at those 36 references, help me now. If you go look at those 36 references, if a teruah is made by a trumpet, you will always find the word takah and a trumpet in there. A trumpet, a shofar, will teruah if somebody takahs it. It's there. Okay? But if you don't see the word takah or in shofar, the teruah is being made by people. Quick illustration. When the walls of Jericho went down, the priest takad the shofar. They blew it. But it says in the same verse, and the people teruad with a gadah teruah. The people let out an ear-piercing shout with a great, gadah means great, with a great ear-piercing shout. So there was a teruah that came from the trumpet, but we know that because the priest blew it. Right. If you don't see the word takah and you don't see the word shofar, who's making the teruah? People are. All right, that's simple enough. Now, the word teruah means that we are to shout. It's not the shouting of words. May seem like a weird point to make, but it's one that needs to be made. It's not the shouting of words. If I say to you, let's shout, the first thing that comes to your mind, most of us, because we're not used to shouting, right?
Right.
We're not used to shouting, so the first thing that would come to our mind if I say, okay, let's shout, everybody want to know, well, what we're going to shout?
Right.
What word? We're going to shout hallelujah? Or we're going to shout praise be to Yahweh? What word or words are we going to use to shout?
Right.
When we think of shout, we don't just think of making an ear-piercing sound. But the word teruah is to make an ear-piercing sound. That's not to say that you can't use words with it. But in its essence, it's not talking about, hey, okay, let's all say hallelujah real loud. It's saying let's make a loud noise. Noise. Everybody say noise.
Noise.
Make a noise. We want it to sound pretty. We want it to sound spiritual.
Right.
But the word means just an ear-piercing noise. Football fans do it all the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Alabama played Florida State last week. Oh, right?
Right.
What word are they using? They're not worried about a word, right? They just shout. Not just them, Alabama too. They shout loud, they shout long. Now they might mix a catchphrase in every now and then. War Eagle, Roll Tide Roll. You know, they might mix words in, but when their team takes the field, have you ever been to a game? Go to a game. When their team takes the field, whoever it is, when their team takes the field, nobody's concerned with what is it we're supposed to say. What we're supposed to say. They just start hollering, screaming, loud, long. You can't hear yourself think in there. Football coaches know that fans will do that. So when they're going to a hostile environment, they will practice their team with loud noise coming over the speaker so the team learns to function in the midst of all that noise and chaos and clamoring.
Yeah.
Wow. That's what the word teruah is. People are teruahing.
Do that again.
No. People at football games don't realize that they are letting forth teruahs. That sounds better. But that's what they're doing. Well, if teruah does not mean trumpet, again, it makes me wonder why in the two places that are speaking of the moedim, it was translated trumpet. Did scholars and translators decide that it refers to that event in 1 Thessalonians 4, and so therefore they changed the meaning of the word, translated it differently in order to support their theory? Okay. I don't know why it was done. All I know and all I can teach and share with you is what the Scripture says. I begin every service with this phrase, are you ready for the Word? I don't ever begin one with, are you ready for my preconceived ideas of what it says? I don't ever begin it with, are you ready to hear what tradition teaches us about this? Are you ready for the Word? And here is what the Word tells us about this moedim that falls on the first day of the 7th month. It tells us that it is a memorial of teruah. A memorial of loud, clamoring roars of ear-piercing sounds. That's what it is. That's all I can present, because that's what the Scriptures tell us it is. A memorial of loud, ear-piercing sounds. We will talk later about how we apply that, but that's what it is. What is Yom Teruah? It is a memorial of loud shouting. Well, what are we to do? Again, there's not a lot of information given to us, but there is an instance of it being observed in the Scriptures. Perhaps we could look at that instance of them observing it and learn from it. Okay? Let's go to Nehemiah 8. rather than trying to come up with our own opinions or ideas of what we might be able to do, let's go look at what they did and see how we could adopt that into our own observance of Yom Teruah. Nehemiah 8. I'll let you find it. It's not one you just turn to every day. Got it?
Yes, sir.
All right, we're going to begin reading in verse 1. I'm going to wait. You know why I'm waiting? Because that's a beautiful sound. Looking out there and seeing you with your Bibles in your laps and smartphones in your hand. Smartphones in your hand made it easier to find it, but those were your Bibles in your lap and you're looking. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to know where it's at in our Bible. Read it, make sure it says what it says. Nehemiah 8, verse 1. And all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street that was before the water gate. And they spake unto Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moshe, which Yahweh had commanded to Israel. And Ezra the priest brought the law before the congregation, both of men and women, and all that could hear with understanding upon the first day of the 7th month. What is the first day of the 7th month? Yom Teruah. And he read therein before the street that was before the water gate from the morning until midday. Let's think about that for a minute. Wow. How many of us would sit somewhere and allow somebody to read to us for 4, 5, 6 hours? Not really exhort, teach, but just read what Torah says. I'm talking to me. Would I? Let's see if they just sat there twiddling their thumbs while he read. Where am I at? Verse 4, And Ezra the scribe stood upon a pulpit of wood which they had made for the purpose, and beside him stood Mattathiah, and Shema, and Ananiah, and Uriah, and Hilkiah, and Maasalah on his right hand, and on his left hand Pedoi, Mishael, somebody help me, Mishael, and Malachiah, and Hashem, and Hashbadana, Zechariah, and Meshullam. Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, for he was above all the people. And when he opened it, all the people stood up. There's reverence for Torah. And Ezra blessed Yahweh, the great Elohim. And all the people answered, Amen, lifting up their hands, and they bowed their heads and worshiped Yahweh with their faces to the ground. And Yeshua and Benai and Sherebiah and Jamin and Akub and Shabbathai and Hodijah and Maaseiah and Kelita and Azariah and Jozabad and Hanan and Peliah and the Levites caused the people to understand the law. And the people stood in their place. So they read in the book in the law of Yahweh distinctly and gave the sense and counts and caused them to understand the reading. So they would read and then they'd explain what they read. They'd read, then they would explain what they read. And Nehemiah, who is the Tershatha, and Ezra the priest, the scribe, and the Levites taught the people, said unto all the people, This day is holy unto Yahweh our Elohim, your Elohim, mourn not, nor weep, for all the people wept when they heard the words of the law. Why would they weep? Because they had lacked knowledge of what it said. They had been ignorant of what it said. They had not been taught what it said. So when they heard it read, heard it explained, they began to weep because they realized we have broken covenant. We have not stayed in covenant with our great Elohim. So the more Ezra read and the more that was explained, the more they mourned and the more they cried. So Nehemiah and Ezra stood up and told the people, stop weeping. Verse 10, then he said unto them, go your way, eat the fat, drink the sweet. Eat what fat? Let's stop right there. Verse 10, eat what fat? Remember I said there were more details given in Numbers 29? Yeah. Numbers 29 explained all the things that were going to be sacrificed on that day. Okay? So eat the fat, drink the sweet, send portions unto them for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy unto our Elohim, our Master. Neither be ye sorry, for the joy of Yahweh is your strength. So the Levites stilled all the people, saying, hold your peace, for the day is holy. Neither be ye grieved. Stop crying, they said. I'm telling you again, stop it. And all the people went their way to eat and to drink and to send portions and to make great mirth, because they had understood the words that were declared unto them. So now let me ask you, how did they understand that they were to observe Yom Teruah? Did they understand that they were to do it with trumpets? Did Nehemiah say anything to them about trumpets? Did Ezra say anything to them about trumpets? Did they say, okay, folks, we need to sound the trumpet and begin? No. None of that. A trumpet is to be sounded before every moedim, but nothing special in this moedim about trumpets. Trumpets are not actually mentioned at all. Here's what we're told they were instructed to do. Observe this day with joy and gladness and eating. What? Yom Kippur is on the way. You're going to observe it with mourning and fasting. But Yom Teruah is to be observed with joy, gladness, and eating. They were told that the joy of Yahweh was their strength. It's important to understand that phrase. It does not say your joy is your strength. It says the joy of Yahweh is your strength. See, a lot of people can be joyous about their life, but it's really a dangerous joy. If you're real happy with where your life is and it's out of line with what Torah teaches, that's a dangerous joy. So this doesn't say, I just need y'all to get joyous.
Right.
It said the joy of Yahweh is your strength. His joy is your fortress, actually what the word says. His word is your defense. Go rejoice, go shout, go celebrate, but your defense is in this fact that Yahweh finds joy in you. He rejoices over you. He loves you. He has set his love on you. Your joy is He loves me. Your joy is He finds joy in me. That's where your joy finds its place. That's where it emanates from, is your understanding that Yahweh rejoices over you. So perhaps, when we read this in context and see what they did, perhaps this moed is a memorial where we reflect on how Yahweh has set his love on us, how Yahweh has chosen us, how Yahweh rejoices over us. It's about learning to bask in and celebrate that he so loved us that he gave his only begotten Son. That he commended his love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, his Son died for us. Perhaps it's about learning to bask in and celebrate that great love. Yes, there is coming a judgment day. Yom Kippur will make that clear. Yes, we will be judged. All the earth will be judged, but all men will be judged. Yes, we should learn, keep, and do the commandments and seek to live holy. But our defense in the day of judgment is not going to be, yes, sir, I kept all of your commandments perfectly. Our defense in that day is going to be, He set His love on me. He loved me while I was yet a sinner. His Son died in my place. His Son took my sin upon Him that His righteousness might be upon me. That's going to be our defense.
Right.
The joy that Yahweh had, the love that Yahweh had over us. If we only understood how real the coming day of Ah is, how real Yom Kippur is, then we would understand how to truly worship the one who has made provision for us to be spared from that wrath to come. If we understood what Yom Kippur was all about, then on Yom Teruah we would have no problem shouting that we will be delivered in that great day of Yahweh, that great day of judgment. That we will be delivered not because of any great thing we have done, but because of how much He loves us. When His wrath will consume all of His enemies, we will be spared.
Amen.
Spared because He rejoiced over us. His joy is our strength. His joy is our fortress. His joy is our defense in that great day. So Yom Teruah is a memorial of Teruah, a memorial of shouting. We shout our joy that we are loved and that soon we will be spared from the coming wrath, and that He, on the heels of that, will tabernacle with us. We will sukkot together. So let's go read verse 12 again and we'll close. So what is, before you read that, what is Yom Teruah? What is a Teruah? Okay, so what's the word Yom mean? Day. So what is Yom Teruah?
Piercing sounds.
A day when Yahweh's people get together and shout with an ear-piercing shout. Make noise. Okay? And so far what we have seen is, what are we, is it supposed to be a fabricated, fake shout?
No.
It's supposed to be what? A shout of joy, right? That comes forth out of us when we realize that Yahweh chose us. That we are to shout with joy. I tell you what, let's read verse 12 now, because it's going to tell us what we're to do. And all the people went their way to do what?
Eat.
You're in verse 12. They're to eat and to drink and to send portions and to make great mirth. And they did that because they understood the words that were declared unto them. When we understand the words that are declared to us, here's what we do on Yom Teruah. We eat, we drink, we send portions, we make great mirth. That word mirth, look it up. It means, Strong says it means blasphemousness. Blasphemousness. Look the word blaspheme up. Blaspheme means to not have a care in the world and to kick your heels high. So that day they didn't have a care in the world. They were kicking their heels high. They were shouting with ear-piercing sounds. And what else were they doing? Eating and drinking. And what did Nehemiah and Ezra tell them to go eat? To eat the what? So on Yom Teruah, we are not supposed to have a keto-friendly diet. I'm not joking. On Yom Teruah, we are going to eat good stuff. We're going to feast in the presence of Yahweh. We're going to eat. We're going to drink. We're not going to have a care in the world. We're going to kick our heels high. We're going to shout. Because that's what we're told to do. Let's sit down and try to figure out what deep spiritual meaning this has. Yahweh says, I joy in you, and I want you to be so aware of my joy in you that it makes you happy. Celebrate with what I've given you. And there's one other thing that we're told to do. What is it? In verse 12. What have I left out? Say what? What does it say, Rita?
Send portions.
Send portions. So, What we're going to do on Yom Teruah is everything we've already talked about, and we're going to bring a gift. I think food, not cooked food, but food that we could dispense to somebody else. Or at least, and good food. Not the stuff that you're not going to eat that's been in the cabinet, so you pull that out and give it away. No. Good food that you would love to have if somebody gave it to you. Or a gift card to a grocery store that sells the good food. Or cash at work too. But on Yom Teruah, let's bring those things together. And between now and then, Yahweh will tell us who to send the portions to. I mean, there's a lot of places we could send it. There are all kind of natural catastrophes taking place right now, hurricanes and earthquakes. But there is a place that Yahweh wants us to send it. So let's find out where that is. That sound good to you?
Yes, sir.
So I'll remind you, and you mind yourself, make yourself a note. Start preparing now to come to Yom Teruah, to not have a care in the world, to be happy, to sit before Yahweh without a frown on your face, to forget everything else and just joy in Him, and to bring something to send to somebody else. Does that sound good to you? Yeah, me too. Stand up. We have Michaela with us today, and Donna, and Alicia, and Rico, and we welcome them. We're glad they're joining us here today as well. Thank y'all so much for being a part of it. Yeah. Yahweh bless you and keep you.
Yes, sir.
Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. As His name is put upon you, so shall He Himself bless you. Now,